We're going to get started with the next session. We now change tracks a little bit, and we're going to actually have the best minds, as the agenda says, the best minds in academia and philanthropy to come together to talk about creative, innovative, at-scale solutions. This is the session where we try and understand systems thinking a lot better. We've organized this one as a fireside chat between Anant and Stephen Gorlick. Professor Gorlick holds the Cyrus F. Tolman Chaired Professorship in the Department of Earth Systems Science and is a senior fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment at Stanford University. At Stanford since 1988, Steve runs the Hydro program and directs the Global Freshwater Initiative. His interdisciplinary approach analyzes coupled human-natural engineered systems to evaluate water supply vulnerability and freshwater security solutions in stressed regions throughout the world. His many publications and 3 books are widely cited. Professor Gorlick is a member of the US National Academy of Engineering, as well as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and he is the recipient of Guggenheim and Fulbright fellowships. Steve and I did a call several weeks ago before we organized this session, and I personally, and I'm sure many of you here will be super excited to hear about the long-term thinking and systems approach that they're taking, to food, water, and energy systems in rapidly urbanizing areas of the world, especially Pune city in Mumbai. So with that, if I could please have Anant, who will be leading questions, and Steve on stage, we'll get underway. Thank you.
Yes, working. So thank you, Vishal, and once again, welcome.
Thank you,
Stephen. So what we are going to do today is, Steve is going to take us through the kind of work he's been doing in India, especially Pune, and he's going to take us through a presentation. And as he does that, I'm going to use my prerogative as moderator to interrupt him and ask him, questions that will connect the very specific and very rigorous things he might be tempted to say to to help us interpret what he's saying in a larger context for us as people in the social sector, people in the philanthropy ecosystem, the kind of lessons that might be there in his approach for the larger problems that we're interested in solving. So over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Anant, and thank you for having me here. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to talk about a project that we have in particular. Right now, we're right in the middle of it. It's called the FUSE Project for Food, Water, Energy for Urban Sustainable Environments. And just to say, we've been working with the Gokhale Institute in Pune to help coordinate our work, and we're a group of international scholars and students and postdocs from various countries all working together. There's about 18 of us all involved in the project. About 70% of the group are social scientists, and the other 30 are engineers and natural scientists.
So Steve, that might be a good thing to elaborate a little bit.
I didn't get very far. He made the deal with he said, yeah, you can give your talk, but I get to interrupt as much as I want.
Yes, and the first question is, what is the significance of the collaboration between, say, social science and natural sciences or engineering, as you said?
Well, I think a lot of natural scientists and engineers think that if they conduct their scientific studies, that they'll produce some truth and that will get adopted by society, and it's just not working that way. The real problems are social. The real uptake is social. And so we engage with communities. I'll talk about our engagement with the regional communities of stakeholders and experts. And then we engage with civil society and with government and that's all social stuff that we make happen.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, so, whoops. Okay, I'm not used to this two-handed system. So we are hydrologists, agriculture people, people who work on energy, people who work on remote sensing, satellite remote sensing. We have urban sociologists, we have economists, we have facilitators, and we have modelers. So that's our team. We're working in Pune, in Maharashtra, in a place called the Upper Bhima Basin, which is the watershed and region, they produce a lot of sugar. Okay, it's a sugar producing area. It gets relatively a lot of water. It's had difficult problems with both droughts and floods, and you'll see it in the news. And so this is just the picture of the region. Whoops, okay, got to get used to doing this. And so this is the region. It's a rural area surrounding the city. The city is about 5 million people, and it's growing. A lot of sugarcane, and then downstream is Solapur, which sees the consequences of what they do in Pune. So we move on to this triangle. The way we frame this problem in terms of food, energy, water is to have a triangle, and it consists of food, energy, and water with an urban center. And the urban region is 5 million people now. It's growing to 11 million people. And so we have this nexus of food, energy, water, and urbanization.
Yeah. So this is, something that's quite interesting to me because, each of these, if you think about food, if you think about energy, if you think about water, they each seem to be sort of problems in themselves or things that are, big problems in themselves, if I want to put it that way. So it seems like you're biting off too much. I mean, you're kind of trying to put it all together into, so why are you doing that? And the question for me is, it obviously adds to the complexity of what you do. Of course, it maybe gives you a more integrated approach. Is the trade-off worth it? And what can other people learn from such an integrated approach?
I do it personally because I think everything else we're doing isn't working. So that's on a personal level. On a scientific level, an engineering level, these are complicated problems. These are problems that involve this nexus of food, energy, water, and increasing population growth and climate change and land use change. And those are all happening very rapidly, especially the population growth and land use changes in the regions I work in, and particularly in India. So you can't look at one particular problem and say, I'm going to solve that problem, because the system is connected. If I say, okay, we want to get off of fossil fuels, and so we're going to have solar, and solar is going to be basically free after we pay for the investment cost of solar. Farmers get solar. What do farmers do? They run their pumps all the time. They lower the water table. They drain the water. Then that affects what water flows to the river. Okay, there's less water in the river, so any contamination that's getting the river is no longer diluted. And then the farmers near the river don't get the water, and then the people don't get the food. So there's this incredible combination of things that happen that you can't deal with when you're just looking at one thing, and that's one of 30 or 40 big things.
Right. But it sounds like everything is connected, and that's true. So it'd be good to hear how you go about addressing this complexity.
Okay. So our process is novel, and it's quite simple. We have a three-step process. First is we have stakeholders, and we get their ideas about their challenges. So we look at their current challenges, we have them describe their challenges, and then we put them in the position of saying, okay, those are your challenges now. What's going to happen in the future? We look at their future in two different ways. One is, imagine Pune is the greatest city in the world. How did that happen? Or two is, here's the additional challenges you have with climate change and with population growth, and how do you overcome that? Then we have an expert group coming in. The first group is people from NGOs and civil society who are all interested in these topics. The experts are those in positions to make changes, and they're usually government officials and such. And so we have those come in. Then we develop a tool. And the tool that we work on, and this is the main component of our current work, is a policy evaluation model. It's a way to look into the future. It's a way to test, okay, I want to have increased tariffs on the rich, and I want to have new regulations on groundwater flow, and I want to have subsidies on certain resources. and we build a computer model that enables you to test those policies and evaluate that in the future. So that's the main thing. And then afterwards, we get back to the stakeholders and say, what do you think?
So this testing, is that possible dynamically? I mean, I can have a policy idea and you'd be able to sort of model it for me and say, this is what it's likely to do in 30 years, 40 years, something like that?
It's pretty much like that, but the computer models, that the last one we've developed took a total of 25 years of manpower or person power to do it. So it's a very involved process, and we test it rigorously. We test all the components of it rigorously. We check out the model, and then we run a spectrum of possibilities of the future. There are scenarios. Scenarios are things we can't control. Things like climate change, things like population growth, which we really don't, there's no immediate lever on those things. And then we have interventions, and the interventions are anything from taxes and quotas to new allocation structures to regulations to new infrastructure. And so we put those together and make a series of narratives, and we look at those combinations of narratives. But we may have 30 different possibilities. We see if any of those will work.
So give me an example of a narrative, for example.
A narrative could be, I'll give you a couple. It could be supply side, it could be demand side narratives, where we increase supply or we decrease demand, and we have incentives to do those things. We have those combined with climate change, which is moderate climate change or extreme climate change. We have that coupled with population growth, that's moderate and extreme, and we do that in an organized and logical way.
And you're able to say in those sort of scenarios, what would particular policy ideas or particular policy interventions, what kind of impact they might have on water, energy, and food? Is that?
It is, but we look at particular metrics of well-being. So there's human well-being, and it's part of its economic, part of its resource allocation, part of its, do only rich people get resources, do poor people get resources? So we look at the sectoral variations, and so we have a series of metrics of well-being that are related to vulnerability. In other words, if there's a shock to the system, do they recover or do they continue to go downhill? And so we have many metrics of vulnerability that we look at.
Wonderful.
Okay, so I'll tell you about the exciting part to me has been the stakeholder engagement. So this is our first process where we had a carefully selected group of people from civil society and from the agricultural community and engineering community, and we met with them. And I'll just show you some photos of the group. It was very moving for me because what I found was that there's just an incredible desire and need to be heard from civil society and from these stakeholders, and they want to give their ideas. They want to be part of the creation process of us working there. It was just a wonderful thing. They let us know their opinions. I brought a bunch of our brochures from this. If you want to see, I have about 20 of them, and you can see the many things. It's about 10 pages long of all the stuff they came up with, and it was fabulous. So that was our first workshop, and here's example of the kind of things that they came up with. So you have food, energy, water, and then you have these different clusters of what they think are their challenges. So these are mainly their challenges to start with. They're finding that there's non-regulated groundwater abstraction. There's degradation of their soils. The farmers were complaining. There's power outages. There's no grid that can handle solar energy. And then you have stuff at the interface among these, urban sprawl. There's a food affordability in the slum regions. We have a big effort in the slum areas. We're doing massive surveys of the slum areas. And then we have the water issues and water competition and poor water quality. So those are all their challenges. And then what we do, and more that are at these interfaces. So we try to map out their many types of problems and challenges on this scheme here, where their dams are filling in or their nutrients and they have flooding. And I should say that the region had, over the summer during this last monsoon season, 57 people died. And they had 1.4 million people evacuated. It's really terrible. So then we had the experts come in, and we also did get some ideas for the solutions from civil society and from the NGO group. But the experts propose solutions, and then we try to aggregate those solutions, and we're still digesting all of their solutions and coming up with some of our own.
So it's almost as if the same problems, you're able to get two perspectives on. One is kind of the lived experience, and the distilling of that into some kind of a knowledge, which is what your stakeholder consultation process produced. And then a more, let's say, an academic, expert process, right? And they kind of lead to perhaps two pictures or two images of the same problem, if I may put it together. So I was curious if you can say something about what were the key areas in which both pictures kind of agreed, and what were some of the things where the experts thought very differently from civil society and vice versa.
I think the biggest thing I've seen in India compared to other places I've worked is that India doesn't think the government's going to help. We worked in Chennai for 7 years, and we worked here, and they're very proactive. There's NGOs that are doing lots of really great things. I think you heard one this morning, or more of the one when I came in, that are just doing great things, and they're not waiting for the government to act. So that's the main thing I hear from civil society, and I think that's a very important message, and it's really great. I know there are activities of the government that are taking advantage of that. So there's one area where there's not enough storage for water and for floodwater overflow. So there's a need for these tanks, these ponds that are around communities. Historically, they've been there, but a lot of them have filled in. So the government's supplying the equipment, and the people supply the labor, and they're building these tanks over again. So there is this recognition in government that there needs to be a collaboration with civil society.
All right.
Okay, so we have the experts, and then we challenge them and say, okay, this region, the corridor going from Mumbai to Pune, is gonna
flick the.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not used to this two-handed thing. Okay, I got octopus thing going. It's going to grow to like 87 million people. And there's the population of Mumbai and Pune don't amount to that in any way. So you're going to be challenged with this increase in urbanization, and it's going to go really quickly. You're talking about this population change happening by mid-century for sure. And then you have climate change. It's going to get hotter, we know that. I'll talk about maybe more of that later. And then you have land transformations where the small farmers are going away and the large farmers are growing. You have incredible growth in the sugar industry, which has benefits but also has some deficiencies. And then you have electrical demand, which is growing by 60% in the last 10 or so years. So, okay, think about that. And so the experts come up with these solutions to this, and we kind of figured those out. We also then move on to our model, and I don't know if you have any other questions about the expert stuff, or you want to go on to the model. Yeah. Okay, so the model is complicated. Some of the interventions, and I know you asked about this, so I'll mention it briefly, is that some of the interventions that we thought up and they thought up, and I'm sorry, maybe you should do it.
So you control
I can do that.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Exactly. So some of the things that we categorize, part of this has to do with governance. It's not government, it's how things actually work, which is governance. And so we looked at what are the possibilities for interventions, and it's transferable water rights, for example, in that one place, in that one aspect. Water supply is rainwater harvesting and recycling. So these are more local solutions that people are looking at. Demand is to reduce what they call non-revenue water. Non-revenue water around the world is a euphemism for either stolen water or water that's lost due to leakages in pipes. And some places have enormous leakages in pipes, and Pune is one of those regions. And then you have agriculture, where you have removal of sugar price supports. That's a very interesting one, because part of the groups, one of the groups that was there represented the sugar industry. They're a huge industry. They employ a lot of people. And they say, you're going to, in one of your possible scenarios, are you going to consider removing the price supports? And I said, yes. And they said, well, you can't do that. That's terrible. I said, well, what if our results show that if you remove the price supports, there's no demand for sugar, and then there's massive unemployment? Is that terrible for you? I don't know that that's going to happen, but you can't prejudge the fact that we're going to try this scenario. We want to look at everything. Okay, irrigation, new technology, biofuels, solar CV, solar
So Stephen, I have a question.
Yeah.
So some of these are politically fraught, right? For example, water rights, even the whole question of sugar in Maharashtra, and even the constituents that you spoke with would have very diverse ways of imagining how to deal with it. So how does your approach deal with those kinds of problems or those kinds of situations?
The way that I've found I've been working on the last few years is to work from the top down. I have buy-in from at the ministerial level, or buy-in from the minister or secretary of water, and I get pretty high-level people who give us all their information, and the groups seem to be embracing this even in the government. They are dramatically interested in this. They don't have a tool. They know they're stuck. They know that what they have is not a viable way to move themselves from the present into the future. So I'm hopeful that you can show them all the things that they have been thinking about won't work. Another lesson we've learned is that the folks in management in these resources work from day to day to try to provide water, sanitation, and whatnot to the population. They work every day, every week to try to get that to happen. They don't have time to think long term. They can't. They don't have the tools to think long term. They can't look into the future. They don't have a good sense of how all these things are connected.
But when you said, I've learned that it's best to work top down, I saw a few eyebrows go up in the audience. So it might be interesting to see how that meshes with the ground up stakeholder consultation.
I mean that in terms of getting the information we do to do our work. So to get data out of a place like India is very, very difficult. Okay, you work from the bottom up, you'll get little secret pods of data, but you won't get the comprehensive data we need. So going to the World Bank, getting them to basically order people to give us data and getting that buy-in is very important to just conduct the work to begin with. And when people see all the things they've been imagining that we're going to try will not work, and that this will end in a tremendous deficit for water, you will get 40 liters per capita per day, 10.5 gallons per day per person, over 90% of the population, and that's what you see, they have to know they have to change things.
So basically get the data, put it all together and hold up the mirror, so to speak, so that you can then start to be real about the solution.
And I think the solutions are real.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have viable solutions, and they co-create those solutions with us. That's the advantage, right? You do have buy-in from the beginning. We're working from the ground up with the people there. I'm just saying in terms of getting this to all come together, you need some top-down buy-in.
Understood.
So here's the complicated part. I'm going to not go into this in great deal, but I just want to tell you what's involved in our systems approach to modeling. So we develop a model that incorporates the physical behavior of the system. Okay, in other words, if it rains, how much river flow does that produce? How much water is recharged? What happens to the groundwater system? If you plant crops, how much yield do you get from those crops, and how much water is used by those crops in terms of consumptive use of those crops? What is the energy supply? What's the capacity of that energy supply? Okay, those are all different modules. So those are the green ones are biophysical modules. Those are simulation models where we actually rigorously simulate all the behaviors of the system, and we can do that today. It's a massive computer undertaking, but we do it, and we're working on that.
It takes 25 man-years.
No, the whole thing takes 25 person-years to actually develop this, but the model doesn't run that slow.
So may I ask a quick question? Supposing, I understand that this is a very rigorous, very careful, nuanced exercise, and will produce outputs that are of good quality, of great predictability, if I may understand. But supposing I didn't have 25 person-years, but I still think that an integrated sort of systems approach is the way to go. What would you recommend, or how would you? I know this is not the question to ask, a rigorous academic, but
I would say find somebody a lot smarter than we are to do the work, because I don't think it's possible. I think we've developed a team, a hand-picked team that works on these problems, And we are a real family and a group that works really well together to get this to happen.
So, Stephen, I wasn't asking it from the point of view in that sense. I was more asking from the point of view of, let's say, others in the room who are, interested in taking an integrated approach. Maybe I can ask it differently. What can they learn from Pune that's kind of applicable elsewhere, for instance? Is there something we can learn?
I think there will be. I don't think Pune is a one-off place. I think all of India can benefit from these particular case studies. We've worked in Chennai. I'll give you an example of what we can learn from Chennai. We did a simpler integrated model that only focused on the water sector in Chennai. And we happened to be focused on that region when they had a tremendous drought and the pipe water system shut down for about a year. Okay. We then developed the model. There was tanker trucks coming in. The way it was surviving was by tanker water, very expensive tanker water coming in. And so we developed a model and we looked at metrics of well-being. And one was, what % of the population will get less than 40 liters per capita per day, some minimal amount of water. This is a tenth or less than what the water you use. Under a condition of a similar drought, if after you build 2 desalination plants where you're getting desalinated water from the sea and sending that to people, okay, how many people will get less than 40 liters per hour? We predicted that if there's another drought, 99% of the urban people would get less than 40 liters per capita per day during the next drought. And that's exactly what happened this year. So we predicted it.
Somewhat unfortunately proved to be right. I mean, from the point of view of the people, it was unfortunate that you were right.
So the lesson is, listen to these things. We're not making this up. We have a track record. And the other thing I could say is that we have, and this is really, we're kind of stuck a little bit, trying to build up some capacity for them to take over this model, and they could run it themselves, and they could use it for their own purposes, and they could decide what they want to have. We don't do this for us to keep. Everything we do, they can have. So that's the capacity building part of this.
Wonderful.
Okay, so the human modules tell us about supply and demand in the urban context, farmer module, slums. We have a particular interest in slum areas, have industries. So that's the basis. We have each group and each making these different modules, and then we say, okay, what are part of the scenarios? Well, the scenarios are shown in red. That's the climate forcing, population, income growth, the kind of rate at which things
Stephen,
develop.
We have less than 10 minutes. I think maybe the answers might be quite useful to have, where you're at.
Okay. Anyway, so I will skip this part.
Yeah. Anyway, it's well, okay.
Okay.
So
I was planning on skipping it anyway. I just wanted to show you the complexity of it. And underneath this is 25 pages of more of this stuff. But anyway, that's what we're up against. Okay, so I can get to the results and the preliminary insights of what I have. I think in terms of engagement, I can just say a few things because we're early on in this process. We've done the stakeholder and expert and modeler engagement, and we found them to be very aware of the challenges they have. In terms of policy evaluation, they just have an incredibly limited ability to assess effective solutions and to look into their future. They're really eager for this approach. I have one story that I think I mentioned to you about a fellow who is an engineer. He's the head of the National Hydrologic Project, which is funded by the World Bank. And I had set up a dinner with him, and he was kind of very stodgy and very distant from me when I first met him. And he came to the workshop, and during the first break, he gave me a big hug. And it was just remarkable. He really got it. And so they're very eager for this kind of approach. They know they need it. And the government is kind of lacking in their short-term, they have a very short-term way of thinking about problems, and they don't have a way to look at long-term plans. As I said, the data acquisition I think we get from the top down, and the civil society is very proactive, and something I said before, and has very low expectations of the government. So that's kind of what I have to say about this, and I can talk about a little climate change if you want.
Yeah, so this is in some sense complicated enough, without let's say a scenario of climate change, without climate change adding a layer of unpredictability, complexity, stress, perhaps. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts on how to think about that and how to, and how are you thinking about it in Pune?
Stress in the sense of climate change or other stresses?
Stresses on the system as a result of.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can show a little bit about the climate
sure.
change
I
stress.
think it's there on.
I think you do it.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. These are the people in our group. Okay, so I can give you a brief introduction. When I saw the title of this talk, which I had nothing to do with, and it was all about climate change, I said, "Where's Greta Thunberg when I need her?" But
She's not hot.
She wasn't available. I'm sorry. I tried. So here's what the climate models show. This is an ensemble, a collection of the climate models. And for those who haven't seen this kind of thing, it's a plot of temperature versus time, and we're comparing the time before about 2005 to the time after, and what climate change is going to do in the Pune region. And this is the average of all the climate models. So, or the ones that are representative of the past in some reasonable way. And under the scenarios, we hold them representative concentration pathways. Those are degrees of carbon emissions and methane emissions. We have up to 5 degrees C increase. That's a pretty substantial temperature increase under what may end up being a realistic climate scenario. Under some mitigation of climate, it stabilizes like a couple of 2 to 3 degrees higher. So that's the thing I think we can be somewhat confident it's going to get warmer. Precipitation's a little trickier. In some places I work, it's really clear there's going to be more droughts. In this place, in Pune, I think the evidence seems to suggest, these models seem to suggest that there's going to be somewhat more rainfall. It's going to get wetter. Okay, and so you have these two graphs of precipitation under major climate change at the top, and then precipitation.
That's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, the mind goes hotter, drier. So
I think it's not surprising. It's a monsoonal climate, and what happens there is there's really strong interactions between the ocean and the land, and these models are contradictory. But on average, they do show an increase in precipitation. But what's to me more important is the variability. I think the world made somewhat of a mistake by saying it's global warming, because then you get a cold year and people say, well, it's not global warming, what are you talking about? It's global variability. We can't deal with the variability. And I don't know if you can see it in the top graph, the variability between that you see some of the models, all those lines are different climate models showing just unprecedented precipitation. Okay,
Right.
and that happens all of a sudden. So it's not only going to be these monsoons, but it's going to be punctuated by massive flooding.
And we in India are experiencing that already in some significant measure. So we're going to run out of time, Steve.
That's all I have.
Therefore, I want to leave the group with your thoughts on a certain question. So if you were a philanthropist and if you were thinking about, let's say, helping India or helping Indian governments, Indian civil society, Indian society take, let's say, a more thoughtful, integrated, let's say, data-driven approach to the issues that it faces. Maybe, let's say, even the narrow issue or relatively narrow issue of urbanization and what that would mean. So, and if, say, the philanthropy ecosystem is interested in supporting India on that journey, so what would be the 3-4 thoughts you would want to leave the group with?
I think the focus is on wanting an immediate return, and I can say what I've seen as partially helpful, but is not going to solve the problem. I think there is a tendency to want to fund a gadget, and even some gadgets have side effects. You could have malaria cure where you have nets, and the nets are impregnated with pesticide, DDT. And then those work for malaria, but then the fishermen get it, and they use those nets to fish with, and the DVK gets. There's all kinds of side effects to these kinds of things. So I think the solutions that you should look for and invest in would be very kind of more long-term, and not try to get the immediate fix and say, we want to see how many lives are saved today and tomorrow, but look at this in a much longer-term basis. And I don't want to want to specify more than that? Because I think there's just too many of them, and too many interests that are really important, but think longer term.
That's a very powerful message. It echoes the message that came from earlier panels as well, which is whether it is empowerment of girls, whether it's let's say health issues or things that are understood as problems in a more traditional sense, or whether it's a problem like climate change and, let's say, designing urban systems that are more resilient and more sustainable. So the key message seems to be, don't look for silver bullets, don't look for short-term, easy input-output kind of relationships. Look at the system and look long-term. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you for listening. Okay, thank you.
Was it all right for you?
Just in terms of sheer scale of challenge, we're talking about 400 million young people in the next 10 years who will be under or unemployed.
When I started, I just knew the impact that I wanted to create, but I really had to learn everything from scratch.
I had no contacts in the sector, and of course I understood even little less about health and nutrition.
I realized that more impactful philanthropy would not come out of just money.
When we started, the issue of fecal sludge was not even talked about.
To be able to achieve our audacious goal of touching the lives of 1 billion people clearly isn't going to be done by Dasra alone. And that's really why we've situated ourselves in a place that requires us to work with others, to invite others to be part of this journey. So I think our origins were very home-based. We would all cook together and eat together and work together.
Dasra's contribution equally has been to provide high-quality talent to the sector. What is very nice to see is that this talent is not just people from the social sector, but they are people from the private sector as well, people from educational institutions.
20 years ago, there were 2 of us, and now, if you see this space, we're about 110 people all together in one place.
We've moved into multiple offices, and as we did so, we were very keen in having other NGOs, other partners, other funders even sit with us to share office space with us.
We literally had a garage, we cut it in half, put a floor on it, and Magic Bus was downstairs, and Dust were upstairs.
When we started working with these NGO leaders, we realized while they were phenomenal in terms of understanding the community and creating interventions that made impact on the ground, what they didn't necessarily have support in is developing themselves, looking at management teams, looking at structures, thinking about creating impact at scale. And that's where we realized that's where our core talent could actually come in to make a difference.
And so Dasra evolved into being more of a bridging organization, and we felt that if you supported the NGO with both kind of funding and capacity building, then these NGOs would really be able to scale.
I think in many ways, attending the Dasra Leadership Program helped me to understand the application of business principles to the social sector, and of course, form a network of very trusted friends who even today are my go-to people whenever I need anything.
I mean, initially my dream had been to get to 5,000 schools, right, in the worst rural, remote areas. Even though I had the vision, I didn't really know the pathway to get to that scale. And I think that's why Dasra was a huge help, because it helped me to build that structure that helped you get from a 500 school to a 5,000 school. I remember Neera would come into my office one day every week to help me build a 5-year budget and a kind of a financial model, which I didn't know how to do.
We were trying to build something that we knew would be robust enough to be able to scale into multiple environments. So, the idea was that we wouldn't just continue doing ad hoc programming, but we would develop a curriculum and IP. So that was the first thing for 5 years, working with Dasra really right on our side.
Dasra has been the backbone for setting up this collaboration network. We've gotten a policy for fecal sludge management, which is the first ever policy any country has launched in the world. And it's all been a part of the whole collaborative platform that we set up.
We were one of the winners of the Dasra Giving Circle Award to fund our work on child health and nutrition. This was going to be the largest urban malnutrition program in the country, and certainly a very, very large program for Sneha to implement. Having Dasra as a partner has been one of the best things for Sneha through this entire process. They were with us for every monthly review meeting. They helped us recruit staff. They helped us identify critical resources, a monitoring evaluation specialist, an IT specialist, which made such a significant difference to the rollout of our programs.
Dasra has played a truly phenomenal role in the development of philanthropy in India. On an annual basis, Dasra works with 90 HNIs and philanthropists who donate over 120 crores each year. Now that is no mean achievement.
When I started my foray in philanthropy, before that I was largely giving money on emotional grounds or people I knew, and it used to be only money. But after I met Dasra, they had what is known as a giving circle. And in the giving circle, they brought forth an NGO, and they helped in selecting that NGO because it was technology based, which is my past experience, and which I felt also was an NGO which was highly scalable.
Over the years, while we've been always at the forefront of providing capacity building support in building stronger institutions, we realized a few institutions alone couldn't solve the problem.
I feel the world has to move towards collaboration. I think Dasra has such a unique opportunity really to play the role of the convener of those collaborations.
And I think the most important skill that we got from the team at Dasra was their ability to build relationships. Everyone is an expert in our field, and getting experts to collaborate is one of the hardest jobs.
So I'm really excited about the next 20 years. The last 20 years have been slow and steady, and I think it's taken us some time to figure out really what is Dasra about and where can we really make a difference.
We think there's a lot that can happen in India that is actually now being translated in the global development sector.
The big need in the nonprofit sector is to have many, many, many more nonprofits that are at scale, are high impact and cost effective, right? And we're not going to be able to get there without organizations like Dasra.
I think the big agenda ahead is also to channel adequate funding into the relatively ignored areas, but which are very vital for our country and for our society.
It is extremely important for India's transformation and to really move the needle globally on the Sustainable Development Goals means India's got to move its goals. And so placing that at the forefront and really rallying stakeholders around that is what we really see collaborative action about.